what happens when this grace opens in your life, where whether it's through practice or in my case accidentally, the veils shift and you get this glimpse. And I think everybody listening, and obviously with you too and myself, it's the happiest moment you can have in your life. Mm-hmm. You will never touch that kind of happiness in any other kind of way. And so, without taking away from any of the grace that is grace, we obviously have to, on the path, as you're saying, metabolize all of the human material that needs to, what I would say, integrate. It has to integrate so that the grace and the human can integrate together. Now, when we are doing that aspect of it, one of the things I like to say is that the grace itself propels forward the unmetabolized material. That it's just a total lie to say that you're going to sit in the meditation hall and just be all groovy and blissed out and never have to come back to meet that material. And the beauty of the grace is that it comes to meet that material. And then, of course, in my life, having lived through, an extreme amount of violence in my early childhood, having survived through my adolescence period, considerable, emotional violence, sexual violence, just there was just sort of no end to a really dark and violent life until grace showed up on my doorstep one day. And so from that darkness, as all that material came up, definitely were movements of a super profoundly strong, well, this is a weird thing to say because suicidal impulse is so strong. Period. It's super intense material. And that's part of its strategy is how intense it is. Prior to my awakening, I had one serious attempt at suicide as well. I had been, there's possibly a wide category of those who just imagine it, those who plan it, and those who implement it. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, if we take that whole category and put it against the human population, we're going to find this is very common. Yeah. This is even normative, we could say. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, it does not represent like mental health issues. I don't think it represents anything that is, extraordinarily, shameful about ourselves. I think it represents a really important marker or flag on our healing journey. It's a catalyst for massive change. And that's what we can see. And so what's happening in that impulse fundamentally, for me anyways, is that, there's a lot of material, wounded pain that has to come up to be metabolized, to be integrated. And in order to do that, it has to be faced. And we've got resistance patterns on top of it saying, no, don't face that material. Like, no. And so that's what we're up against. This really intense, don't go there. And the piece about the suicidal impulse, the suicide idealization, or the actual attempts is that it's not at your darkest day. It's when it's gray. Yeah. Because when it's really dark, you're in survival mode and you're actually much more safe from that impulse. What happens is it's the signal when it's gray. And at that gray zone, it says, the voice says, look I've done all this work. I've been trying all these ways. I've even gotten a bunch of stuff that I wanted. And it's still hell to be me every day. Mm-hmm. So let's get out of here. Let's just get out of here. That's what this voice of resistance is saying to us. And it's snagging us at the moment that it's not nearly so dark, because it's pointing to that and going look it's not even so dark and it's hell to be me. And it's so strong in its messaging and so sort of intense and shocking that we tend to miss the fact that it's 100% bullshit. It's totally freaking lying. It is never, just yesterday it was awesome to be you. Just 10 minutes ago it was awesome to be you. And you've made immense changes in your life. and that this is signifying a movement that you're sitting on. As I like to say, it's like sitting on the horizon. You can't see it, but it's right on the horizon, is a massive change for you, is happening. And this is the signature of it. And the thing about us humans is that fulfillment and happiness and these things that we're looking for, they aren't a static place that we arrive at and then we're done. And that's the beauty of being human, is that our evolution is ongoing. And we climb one mountain and it just gives us this glorious view to climb the next. And then this glorious view to climb the next. And every peak we hit creates so much more freedom and so much more functionality and so much more happiness in our life. And the cool piece is that no matter how high we get, there's more to go. And as humans, in terms of our personal capacity on the planet, most of us have barely touched our capacities. Our capacities for joy and happiness, our capacities for like wealth and abundance, our capacity for purpose and change. I mean, if we look at somebody like, Bill Gates, I mean, this guy has capacity to contain hundreds of billions of dollars. Like, my God, that's a big capacity, right? And this is really new on our planet, that this level of abundance is showing up, right? But so we've barely touched the surface of most of our capacities, and we have mountains to climb. We've got this gorgeous evolving process in front of us, and fulfillment is going to keep moving, being a moving target that we get to harvest and thrive off of, and then evolve for the next. And every time that we're about to make a substantial shift in that evolution, this impulse is going to show up. And it's the very signature that there's like huge freedom for you sitting right on the horizon, just out of your eye line. And I think when we're looking at these fantastic contributors like Anthony Bourdain or Kate Spade, really people who had lots of abundance, had lots of purpose, had lots of connection. I have family, I have children. These are people who were literally on the move for a great evolution. They were just about to make a big leap into this next level of freedom and emancipation. And they just got hooked by this impulse that is lying and saying the opposite, saying, look, you got everything. And it's not even so bad right now. It's been way worse. And it still fucking sucks. And there's no end to this. So let's get out. Looking at the science of it, there's a lot of people who've done a lot that, science, I can't remember the field of science, where they've basically taken the brains of suicide victims and measured them and scanned them and looked at them. And what we see is regulation of dopamine and serotonin being kind of broken regulators, as they define it. So let's say the prefrontal cortex there of our brain, the upper brain, is our regulator. And then deep in the brain, buried deep into the brain there, is all of this stimulus neurons that are going to support dopamine and serotonin. And so what we're finding, or what they're finding, is that the inability to regulate dopamine makes people highly reactive. So that the thought, just as you're talking about, the thought arises, and we become highly sensitive to this thought because of these lower dopamine levels. Now, the largest community that's, of course, most impacted by suicide is adolescents. And in adolescence, they have yet to fully develop that prefrontal cortex. That's what adolescence is marked by, this brain development. And teens have very low levels of dopamine, especially in comparison to their childhood scenario. But the solution is not just this chemical movement, because when they give antidepressants to people that are, of course, boosting the levels of serotonin and dopamine, it's not effective. It's not working. And so what we're seeing is kind of exactly what you're talking about. There's this, what we're needing to do here is build a resilience to this type of resistance pattern. And in order to do that, we're going to need to do a couple of things. To build resilience, we're going to have to be self-aware, right? We're going to have to be that which observes it instead of it. We're also going to need to understand the purpose of it. Purpose is a massive support of resilience. So that's where in our community, and we always talk about like, what's the intelligence of what's arising right now? What's like peek through and why is this showing up in your life right now? Why is this challenge right at your doorstep? And all of us with a little self-awareness can start to recognize this importance. Like, there's something really intelligent at play here. What is it? And so understanding that this thought pattern that's showing up is highly purpose driven. And it's going to be, it's an absolute a signifier of huge shift. And so having the self-awareness of what it is, having in some of these thoughts, right, that you're so beautifully articulating, the thoughts that are going through, like seeing those thoughts and being able to sort of see the importance of it, or see the intelligence, or see what I'm calling the purpose of it. This is how we start to develop a resilience to this, because it is not something that that you had to deal with once as an adolescent and then it never came back again. And we have these movements too of like when these public figures, you know, a few years ago was Robin Williams, you know, it's Kate and Anthony now. And, you know, the statistics show us that when we can recognize or we know somebody and in the celebrity sense, you know, like have a bond with, and they choose that option, it amplifies the option for us.
Yeah.
So I think, like, frankly, there's a little cascading domino of that thought process happening. And so what our job is to build resilience to it, to understand its absolute purpose in our lives. And then how do we become resilient? A low dopamine brain is a highly sensitive human, much more connected, because we're talking about high reactivity.
Yeah.
Right. So we know that a low dopamine brain, you show the person an image of an angry person to someone who's got very consistent regulated levels of dopamine, and they have a certain reaction. You show it to low dopamine brain and they get a much more heightened reaction. But the reverse is true also. Positive stimuli is much more highly reactive, right? So what we're getting, because if we're talking about a low dopamine brain, we're really talking about one of the most beautiful things about an adolescent brain, which we all did, was that around 19 or 20, you knew everything. Like you totally had it figured out. Like in a real way. And I don't mean that in an asshole way. I mean, like in reality, you kind of saw it all. You kind of figured it all out. And that is the gift of the low dopamine brain. It's an ability to have a long, deep processing of information with lots of connections involved that's not getting stopped by pragmatic or practical information. So there's this like fabulous ability in teens are natural innovators. They are natural free thinkers, very free mindsets. They are beautiful risk takers, right? The risk is much more beneficial than the challenge. And so when we're talking about adults with low dopamine brain, which is pretty much anybody who had an early childhood wounding or is working with a developmental delay or is, you know, let's just say it's 3/4 of the population. But this is a phenomenal, fantastic movement in terms of risk and innovation and creative solutions. I mean, this is what that brain does. In the olden days, which is like, whatever, 300-400 years ago plus, adolescence was a very short period. You didn't come into like puberty and the brain development till about 16, 17, 18, and you left it by 20. These days, it starts as early as 13 and goes all the way to the late 20s, mid to late 20s. We have so much innovation on our planet. We have so much liberation. We have so much, our society moves entirely different. And it is in no small part because of what's occurring in our adolescence and this incredible brain pattern. So personally, as a low dopamine brain human, that high reactivity to things equals me coming up with lots of risks, lots of solutions, lots of innovations, really sensitive to experts and mentors and my own personal research. I mean, this is what a dope, like we're not doped out. Like we're really connected and highly sensitive. That's what that is. The point I think to drive home is that it's a normative, common experience. Yeah. It has a purpose and intelligence behind it. Our job on the spiritual search, because we will come face to face with it, is to build a resilience and to know that that we will have capacity to have resilience, and at every mountaintop we climb of it. And we can all, everybody listening can look back to those times when they were at their very lowest, and that life right after that changed enormously, and changed enormously for the better. Mm-hmm. And so these are signifying times of very, very big change. And so these catastrophic thoughts are signifiers of catastrophic change. And the proof is in your life. The proof is in your own experience. So those voices, which is beautiful to, like, anybody listening, write those voices down, because that is what the voice of suicide is. In my case, it also has things like, you'll never ever get what you really want. Mm-hmm. And so forget it. Let's get out. Also, it's only going to get worse from here on out. Mm-hmm. Oh. Let's get out. And then this, so it included, like, also I'm a burden. I'm so horrible to have these thoughts. I'll never be sane. I'll never be okay. And then there's these sort of like kind of that it absolutely swings into your core pain, whatever that is. I'm not worthy. I'm not loved. Some level of injustice and betrayal. It is absolutely going to focus on that and bring that all the way up in a profoundly activated, highlighted, inflated way. So in a lot of my work, I always, in everything I ever do, I always include a chapter on suicide, because I think that it's really a key common experience. And I write in that stuff that really what you're looking at is a program of resistance, primal resistance, trying to keep the wound in the body. And the coding is that this wound is so terrible, we must, kill the organism, least it be surfaced and dealt with. Least, don't let it be metabolized. Now, it's coding and it's lying. So this is a lot of what, I got to watch by having these like profoundly strong suicidal impulses over all of those years in awakening, where there's just so much change happening and so much evolution happening. So I got to this firsthand look, and I could see this literal coding in this programming. So I think it's really helpful to identify this is coding and this is lying. I think of it like I see it as somatic. So let's assume that the buried wound, and something worth pointing out is that this is a really ancient form of resistance and programming. So this is caveman days old. And I think if you looked at the DNA of people who actually committed suicide all the way to suicidal ideation, all that movement, I think you're going to see a certain type of cave behave, like, whatever that is, our DNA will trace all the way back to those original people. And it's this old piece of DNA. So yes, it is written in the genetics. It's sitting there. It's information that says it's not safe to continue, which, if you're running from saber-toothed tigers and shit like that, that might have been true back in the day. It's certainly not true now. And our resistance patterns, we have a number of various resistance patterns: avoidance, blocking, confusion, sleepy, aggressive mind, all these sort of things. But this one, the suicidal impulse, is like, again, it's common, but not everybody has it. Some people it really isn't there, that code. And once activated, it boots up the mind, right? It influences the mind. It's fueling the mind, which is why it's got these really aggressive kind of movements, and it's pulling in all of our painful thoughts, et cetera, to sort of enact its programming. It can never be stronger than our awareness, period. Resistance never can be. It never can be stronger than our awareness, which is why self-awareness is the first really big step in terms of resilience. And that's the first step in any kind of resilience about any kind of stress is self-awareness. As soon as we tap back, we just step back to that which is aware of this, right? It's so loud. It's so aggressive. It seems so true. Something's aware of it. Something's hearing this. What is hearing this? Mm-hmm. And if we're tired and exhausted of it, right, we can just relax back to that which is aware of it. This is the beginning of that self-awareness movement. If we can drop in, what is this purpose, some of which we talked about, that's incredibly helpful as well for having some awareness there. That's the first piece, right, to get resilient. I think there's a couple of other key things to do. I think one of the things we need to do, ironically, is create a little bubble of goodness for ourselves. When these thoughts are coming up, when we're really navigating this information, it's really strangling us, which Kiran's saying there's this coding that's totally lying, but it's really captivating, is booting up. If we can create a bubble, and by bubble, I mean we disconnect from social media, period, out now. And if that means you hide the icon on your phone, if that means, it just closes off get out of social media. It means definitely get off all news. It doesn't even matter if it's like leftist, The Guardian, the BBC, whatever it is. Get out. It also means very little interaction with any kind of the world, which might be your community, that is navigating stressful triggers, right? So we're going to bubble ourselves out away from stressful triggers. And that's really, really important. And I think this is where it's we can look at when we were children, and we would our day was get up, mom has oatmeal and we watch cartoons and, we kind of have a safe, sweet day for the most part, not to minimize how much domestic violence played in early childhood wounding in our lives, but to say that there's a kind of a way that children bubble, from the stress of the world. And we're kind of, so if we go resilience equals step 1, identify self-awareness, know there's some purpose, have some information about it. 2 is a bubble, creating this little bubble. And most of us and almost everybody listening has enough tools that in the bubble, we can cultivate a much better mind space, right? That we can start to cultivate a space, whether it's reading our spiritual books, whether it's sitting in meditation, which is where that awareness gets so intimate with the information, it literally pops through to a much more harmonious, peaceful space. Right. And this is what daily practice of meditation and all the research shows you. If you do meditation on a daily basis, you are building resilience for stress. You are building an opportunity to pop through into a peaceful default that's sitting there behind the thought stream. Right. So in our bubble, we can do this. We can do meditation. We can disconnect from stressful triggers and we can kind of keep ourselves in a cozy little movement. And it takes practice of building that little bubble. Where it's just cozy. It's just the kid and the dog and cartoons for the afternoon in bed, or, these ways that we just disconnect from stressful triggers. And then I think the third thing that we need to do, if we're right up against it, just what you're saying, it's so loud and you're sitting there with the knife on you, or you're fantasizing about where the pills are in the house and how you can mix them. Or you're fantasizing about just driving the car off the road. When it's just so captivating. I call that you're right at the front line of that impulse. At that point, I say bring in the comedians. I think comedians save lives. I absolutely think the purpose of a comedian is to save life. Now, obviously, the comedians that have less addictions in their own lives, that are using less
rage and despair.
The more PG,
right?
The more PG the comedian that's genuinely funny, the bigger the win. The world's best at this currently is Ellen DeGeneres, right? Her stand-up work. She has an old album called Taste This that I think is on Spotify. I think you can get it on YouTube. I mean, it is just laugh out loud to you, crying and peeing, funny. funny, so funny. And, Eddie Izzard is a big one for me. I mean, that guy just in a few minutes makes me roll on the ground. And he's got a piece called, an old piece called Dress to Kill, which is worth buying because it is so funny. And you know, Steve Martin had some great stand up, again, like no addictions, really good, clean fun, you know. And I think honest to God, like 2 hours of big ass belly laughs makes that knife fall out of your hand, makes those thoughts, you know, it pulls you out of the danger zone. And again, wholeness isn't a static, stable place. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And every time you're face to face with that suicidal impulse, you're about to get into a bigger pool of wholeness. That's really what it's signifying. And so our evolution into, so if your access to wholeness is just a thread big right now, it's okay. It's going to grow. You know, if your access to wholeness feels like a swimming pool, you know, awesome. It's eventually going to turn into an ocean, and this is the path forward to keep accessing. It's not this static, you know, same place. It grows. It absolutely grows. And that's what, every time you're up against this suicidal impulse at some level, your freedom place is about to get bigger. And when someone says to me, like, we need to have faith, I'm like, okay, this is how we have faith. We write a list of all of our direct experience of when change occurred, or what, you know, how life presented a solution. Your direct experience, let's make a list. Let's start with today. Today, what miracles showed up in your life? What arrived just when you wanted that, or just because you'd asked for that or needed it? Let's start to make a list. We only have to get probably 3 weeks big before you have enough direct experience that you can have faith inside of despair. So the whole body, mind is feeling despair, and you got like a list in front of you. Of just like the movie lineup shifted, and I got in these seats, and then, you know, like yesterday I had the smallest one. Oh, I needed a keychain, and there was and I wanted a keychain that had a little light that you push and has a little flashlight, because that was my old keychain. It was really helpful. And I came out of the car and I was like, right, I need a keychain. And I looked down and there was one on the ground, and it was one of those little light ones, and it said California Parks on it. And it was like, oh, here's today's miracle, you know, like how fantastic, you know? And every single person, every single one of us, and every single person can make a list that is sizable over the last 3 weeks. And that's even with just a thread of access to wholeness, you know, like, so direct experience creates the faith, and regardless of our despair, that's how you access it. The further you go, the better it gets. Absolutely. And, you know, it gets so good. I mean, it gets so good. And there are times where you think it just could not be better than this. And really, it's even just this ordinary being. It's not like there's fireworks and millions of dollars in your account, but even sometimes that will also show up. I mean, the more wholeness you are navigating from, the more wholeness is manifesting. But it gets this ordinary being where there's just an incredible connection. And that connection is really not being severed by material that needs to be metabolized. And I just want to clarify that. That doesn't mean it's not disconnected because I'm not awake, or if I'm an awakening process, then I'm always going to be connected. Like, it's like, no, the metabolized material is really captivating and can absolutely eclipse that connection. But the more and more that material gets metabolized, the more and more life gets functional, the more and more grace has very few blockages. There's very few eclipsing movements. This does not change this suicidal impulse in my experience. And that's not my own direct experience, but that's a lot of advanced, very high level spiritual teachers where it still sits there as an evolutionary, you know, you're just on the peak of a real evolutionary shift. And it's the, you know, block guard, you know.
So interesting.
So, yeah. And that's okay. We can build the resilience, you know. It doesn't have to, you know, like, I don't think it takes us out for days or weeks. I think it can take us out for a couple of hours, or it can take us out, you know, like, it doesn't change the intensity of it. It doesn't change the captivation of it. We're still going to need the self-awareness, identifying what's going on, those voices, being the observer. We're still going to need to understand the purpose, like what that raw pain that it's rolling back into, that injustice or something, that's what's leaving, right? Mm-hmm. That's what's leaving. And so we got to see the purpose of that. It doesn't stop us from needing a bubble. It doesn't stop us from needing to take our hypersensitive system into some positive goodness, to be easily influenced by goodness. Mm. Those are still the same steps. There's a ton of free material if people need some support. Mm. On my website, if you haven't already got it, Freedom versus Fear, you can just freely download that book, and it goes through all of the resistance patterns and all the ways you can help get under them. My blog, tons and tons of material. It's free. Just go mysticgirlinthecity.blog. There's especially around solutions and healing it. On my website, under the shop page, is a guided support for panic attacks. And it's a meditation to just take you through that dark place. There's also one called Go to Sleep. And in the Go to Sleep is an option for that middle of the night, shaking you awake, fear, anxiety, suicidal impulses, because it loves to creep in the wee hours